Good evening. I'd like to welcome the audience both here in the room in the ISUB on the University of Idaho campus and watching via UI Live wherever you may be. I'm Bill L. Smith. I direct something called the Martin Institute and the Bora Foundation here at the University of Idaho campus. The Martin Institute is one of the co-sponsors for this event. Our job is looking at the causes of war and the conditions necessary for peace and looking at the international reaction to events. We're co-sponsoring with the Department of Politics and Philosophy, who has a similar interest. And one of our presenters is also from the School of Global Studies. So the three of us together are staging this panel discussion. A word on our focus. What this is not first. We are not here to adjudicate the decision by the United States and Israel to go to war, it being a fait accompli at this point. So if that was what you were hoping would happen or fearing would happen, it won't be part of our discussion this evening. We are also using the term war to describe what is transpiring, even as the legal definition of whether it has been declared or hasn't been declared yet and what it is or isn't is a case in the United States. It does describe what people are experiencing in Iran and the areas around Iran and the kinds of events that are happening. So we'll use war even though it's not universally accepted as legal yet and in terms of what we're doing. We're going to proceed tonight with 7-minute presentations from 5 different faculty members. They'll each introduce themselves briefly in turn. We're going to cover the situation in Iran right now. Well, events are happening awfully fast. So we turned in our slides and got ready with our comments at noon today, and we know that several things have happened this afternoon, and so as they are now, maybe it's better said as they were this morning. Follow that, we'll have U.S. considerations, what drives the U.S. right now, the regional context in the wider Middle East, reactions from U.S. allies, and what might be next for and in Iran. Our focus on geopolitics and big picture impacts of the war should not diminish the myriad individual impacts occurring, both here and throughout the Middle East, but particularly in Iran. UI students should be aware that of available resources through the Counseling and Mental Health Services Office. Director Keith Hansen, Keith, if you can wave, is here this evening. And he has both literature you can take at the end of the event or a listening ear if you need to talk and learn about resources that may be available. Anyone feeling overwhelmed, please feel free to talk to Keith at the end. It's always a good idea to keep in mind when you're talking about big picture things like geopolitics and movements of countries hither and thither, that while these are important and policies are made on the aggregate, they're felt most strongly, the impacts are felt most strongly at the individual level. Finally, a word on Q&A. I'll remind us when we get there, but we'll have 20 to 25 minutes left for Q&A. We have a firm 6 p.m. end time tonight. We'll only have questions and answers for folks in the room. I'll repeat the questions that are asked so that our online audience can hear them. We'll end the formal part of our meeting at 6 p.m. sharp, but stay past that for informal conversation with interested folks. And so we're going to start now with the situation in Iran, and if we can change slides, and away we go. That is you. One more. There we go. No?
I'm good at this. All right. So my name is Erin Kimball-Demond. I am faculty in the School of Global Studies.
Erin, sorry, will you move the microphone closer to you, please? Thank you very much.
Can you all hear me now?
It's a good thing we got here early in practice. We were ready to go. This does count against your 7 minutes, Erin?
That's okay. I was short anyway.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Erin Kimball-Demond. I am faculty in the School of Global Studies, but a political scientist by training with expertise in comparative politics and international relations. I'm just going to set the stage a little bit. Right now, we are entering our 2nd week of a U.S.-Israel conflict against Iran and its proxies in the region. Since the first attacks on the 28th of February, the supreme leader and several key military and political figures have been killed in this offensive. A new supreme leader has been named, the choice of which indicates a continued hardline stance from Iran and a strong role for the Revolutionary Guard Corps into the near future, as well as serious long-term destruction is being witnessed on the ground in Iran as we speak. The current Iranian regime, it arose from a revolution in 1979, which brought into existence a semi-presidential theocracy. At the top of this government is a Shiite Muslim cleric known as the Ayatollah. He is the commander of the armed forces, both the Iran's national military as well as the more infamous Revolutionary Guard Corps, and he molds much of the government and its policy through his ability to appoint and vet other political actors within the country through a guardian council that is made up of 88 senior clerics. The formal public stance of this leader has been both anti-American and against the existence of the State of Israel since its inception. Underneath this theocratic layer lies a presidential system with a unicameral legislature that is directly elected by Iranian citizens. This legislature was historically filled mostly with clerics, but now it is dominated with representatives that have ties to the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Technically, the supreme leader has authority over the Revolutionary Guard, which is, to be clear, a paramilitary force that is separate from the military of Iran more broadly. Increasingly, however, the Revolutionary Guard has been able to take power into their own hands, with the leaders of this group dominating Iran's foreign policy through its Quds forces, directing repression in the country through their Basij militias, and they maintain control over Iran's nuclear program. The Revolutionary Guard Corps has about 125,000 soldiers, and it is deeply intertwined with the country's economic and energy sectors. It is in fact estimated that the Revolutionary Guard Corps controls at least a third of the Iranian economy, as well as I've just said, the legislature. It is, in other words, deeply intertwined in the security, political, and economic structures of Iran. This is important to keep in mind when we begin thinking through what actual regime change in Iran might entail, and the instability that would inevitably follow from aggressive attempts to do so. When we try to get a clear picture to answer the question potentially as to why now, it is important to know that Iran has recently been facing many rather acute challenges. This has been particularly so in the domestic setting, but can only be understood from a wider regional and international context. First, domestically, the Iranian regime has faced waves of protests on and off several times since 2009. These have generally been focused around political and social dissatisfaction. For example, the 2009 protests against the outcome of the elections that year, and the widespread protests in 2022 were against the mandatory hijab law. Increasingly, however, the regime has responded in brutal and rather systematic ways to these kinds of protests with harsh repressions under conditions of internet blackouts. Last December, a new wave of protests broke out across Iran. These were driven by a free falling of their currency and a serious economic crisis in which food prices had skyrocketed by nearly 70% across Iran. This was in combination with a water crisis that was hitting the country at the same time, a crisis that was driven by the mismanagement of water resources under long-term drought conditions. Rather than starting with students, or in the cities as most past protests had, these protests emanated from shopkeepers and quickly spread across Iran, even into the rural areas. In response, it is estimated that upwards of 30,000 people were killed by the Iranian security forces. This economic crisis, however, did not happen in a vacuum. Over the past year, the Iranian regime has faced increasing pressures from sanctions placed on them by the US and Europe that have severely limited oil exports and restricted the access to global financial systems. And this has been the major cause of the drastic devaluation of the rial. Over roughly the same time frame, Iran's legitimacy in the region has dropped significantly as its proxies have faced heavy military defeats in Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria, showing weaknesses in its foreign policy abilities. This loss of legitimacy was further proven by their relatively tepid response to the attacks on their nuclear sites last June. All of this means that Iran has been facing some serious challenges to its regimes from both domestic and international sides. So where are we? At this point, while there is significant damage to Iran's energy sector, transportation hubs, including air and naval ports, and increasingly large casualty rates from the bombing campaign and its environmental fallout, there are few signs that the Iranian regime has been terminally undermined. The new Ayatollah is the son of the old one, and he shares his father's hardline positions. The security forces of Iran are still very active on the streets, policing any potential dissent from its citizens. and opposition to the regime remains fragmented and without real leadership. And that's where I'll stop.
Thank you. We're going to switch now to U.S. considerations.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Chen Wang. I'm the Slayton Endowed Assistant Professor of East Asian Politics here in the Department of Politics and Philosophy. My own research focuses on domestic politics of international relations. In particular, I study how some leader-level attributes interact with institutional features to shape foreign policy outcomes. This is a big topic, U.S. considerations in the use of force. There's no chance that I could really exhaust all the considerations within 7 minutes. So what I'm going to do is to try to frame my talk around this puzzle, okay? I think it's fairly safe and reasonable to make this assumption that almost every American leader since Jimmy Carter actually prefers a regime change in Tehran, okay? And this preference is largely shaped by this very type of rivalry between two countries, and more importantly, the way that the Iranian regime was trying to resist the U.S. presence in the region and challenge the U.S. interest, right? Using militancy and trying to proliferate. Those are all the red lines that the U.S. leaders don't want to see. But the puzzle is, why now, right? Why is President Trump the guy who really pulled the trigger at this moment? So I want to talk about the factors at the institutional level here in the U.S., international level, and the tactical level, just to focus on 3 very specific factors that create this more permissive environment that makes the decision to use force less concerning or less costly. So we have read a lot of news coverage about this war or this conflict in news media. But there's something that has not been really mentioned by this news coverage, which is the uniqueness of Trump's position in the U.S. Normal presidential electoral cycle, right? He's a rare case. He is a lame duck president who's early in his tenure, right? Well, hopefully he thinks he's a lame duck president. But I mean, and this status matters a lot when it comes to the decision to use force, because research has shown that American presidents who are early in their tenure, especially during the first 2 years, are way more likely to get involved in the conflict than at any other point during their tenure, right? And the reason is straightforward, because just winning an election, they feel less constrained by the electoral pressure. They feel less probably held accountable by the public opinion, and that gives them this more autonomy in pursuing a policy, okay? And oftentimes, this policy is more driven by preference than necessity, okay? And the same dynamic actually applies to the end of your presidency. When you won a re-election and approach the end of the second term, you became a lame duck, you don't have this re-election concern anymore, you again regain some autonomy, okay? And again, your autonomy is often driven by preference than necessity, okay? And when these two forces, simultaneously present today, that can largely explain why Trump, compared to his predecessors, especially more recent predecessors, feel less constrained when it comes to make a decision to use force, okay? And I think this dynamic is further reinforced by the very nature about Trump's leadership turnover. So my own work actually finds that when a right-wing leader replaces a left-wing leader in democracies, that is the situation where this Democratic leader is especially more likely to get involved in a conflict early in their tenure. But I'm going to skip these points just for the sake of time. I'm happy to talk more about this during Q&A, okay? Let's shift to the second factor that matters here, which is at the international level. I think Trump is also facing a very unique, permissive international environment, because at this moment, obviously, Russia is pretty occupied by their own war, and China is unexpectedly in a very hesitant position, okay? And this hesitation is also surprisingly a result of Trump's kind of a new détente approach to Beijing. Because from Beijing's perspective, the Chinese leaders actually anticipated a much worse bilateral relationship at this moment, okay? But what surprised them is they actually reached some level of strategic stability with the Trump administration. And that creates this hesitation because they don't want to openly or too forcefully challenge Trump and then disrupt this strategic stability. Okay. At the same time, beyond great powers, regional powers also matter in this context. I think also Trump unexpectedly created an environment where these regional Middle East autocrats feel more comfortable. Okay, somehow they want to accommodate his agenda because for a long time the U.S. foreign policy in the region has been torn apart by these two conflicting interests. One is pursuing a realpolitik interest in the region, and the other is protecting human rights, democracy promotion, and these two things come into conflict. Okay? And the existence of this tension actually make the regional autocrats a little bit nervous. Okay? It's a constant nervous because they kind of fear there might be a US president who's willing to prioritize the second side of values there. But Trump, the nature of his foreign policy was often described as transactional realism. Okay? Or in other words, it's kind of pragmatic, and that really makes these regional autocrats feel comfortable. Okay? They want to make a deal to enhance or ensure their regime stability or political survival. Okay. Well, you can think counterfactually. Okay, so if the same set of factors were presented to Biden, he might not be able to gather enough regional support, to use the U.S. military base in the region to conduct these military actions. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh, and then lastly, this actually overlaps with what Aaron just mentioned earlier. I think Trump is also presented with this rare window of, I still had a hard time to describe this as a strategic or tactical opportunity, okay, but I think what matters most here is the largely weakened regional, this proxy and militant network that's often act as a delegate for Iran. So, that matters. Okay, just to conclude, I think these factors are at best facilitating factors. We don't know yet, and we might even know forever what's the real deterministic force really is. Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Thank you. It's time for us to switch to the regional context.
Hello all. Thanks for coming and joining us today. My name is Emine. I'm an adjunct instructor in the Department of Politics and Philosophy. And my specialty, I'm working on conflicts, civil conflict and interstate conflict, and terrorism in general. So let's start. After a coordinated military strike on Iran retaliated immediately. So by Sunday, at least 14 countries, the reported number is that, at least 14 countries were directly affected. So this war is not anymore between Iran and US and Israel, because Iran is deliberately targeting the US partners in the Gulf and treating them as co-belligerents to maximize the cost of the campaign. So the question remains for us, what does this war mean for the states and political order of the broader Middle East? Now, Gulf countries, the Gulf states are walking a tightrope. So they are providing logistical support to U.S. Central Command, but they will not join the campaign openly. And Gulf governments publicly condemn Iran and invoke sovereignty, but privately none of them wants an incoherent and collapse Iran on their doorstep for their security. Besides, the political and economic consequences of this war is going deeper for the Gulf countries in general. So the Gulf civilian infrastructure, like the airports, luxury hotels, AI centers, oil installations, all got hit, and the Gulf's identity, the image they are creating, they are working on, has been long worked as safe global center that's open to business, tourism, and connectivity is now all got hurt. So what about the Iran and its proxies then? So one of the stated U.S.-Israeli objectives is to eliminate Iran's terrorist proxy. So terrorist proxy network. The evidence so far suggests the network is fragmenting, but we cannot really be sure if they are dissolving. So let's start with Hezbollah. Until a few years ago, Hezbollah was the strongest ally of Iran, but now it's at its weakest point after Israeli attacks back in 2024, but that's decimated its leadership. And Houthis in Yemen, hit by UK and US coordinated attacks back in 2024 and 25, and they now refrained from direct military involvement while maintaining ideological solidarity with Tehran. And Iran-linked Iraqi Shia militias announced their willingness, their readiness to disarm in solidarity with Israel. So it's kind of a moment of truth for Israel and its proxies, its allies in the region. So this demonstrates how much Iraqi Shia community's orientation tracks only economic and political interest, not just the ideology one. So in a way, axis of resistance on that part, on Iran's part, dissolving, but they are not dissolving, but they stand down for survival for now, but we cannot really be sure since the events are still evolving. So yet the situation on that axis is not a coincidence. So if you just go back a couple of years back, so Iran for the last couple of years taking down Iranian allies in the region. So the one by one, like starting from Hezbollah, Houthis and Iraqi militias were already signed off. And now Iran has to stand alone. So this is kind of a part of the greater strategy of Israel. What about economic results in the region? So war is triggering a cascading economic effect, not just on the region, but the fall is hardest on the countries far from the battlefield, especially in Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. The oil production is down in Gulf and especially in Iraq. Energy routes either closed or at risk right now. So the traffic at the Hormuz Strait is down by 90%. Approximately 20% of the world oil is passing through Hormuz Strait, and Suez Canal traffic is declined and due to security concerns here. So let's do a quick recap on each country. So beyond the immediate military conflict, this war is accelerating a structural reordering of the Middle East political landscape, with winners who are not celebrating and losers have nothing to say. Iran, let's start with Iran. Iran is the loser, apparently, and now it's facing a risk of survival. And Israel is clearly the winner in this war. Besides the military success, the domestic politics now rewarding Netanyahu's performance. And the Saudi Arabia's stand is now unclear for now. Even though its own oil infrastructure got hit, its biggest rival in the region now weakened. And the other Gulf countries, they became target and their defenses depleting. So the diplomatic talks with Iran all wasted. And the Lebanon now facing an invasion risk, but at the same time, Hezbollah's historical weakness can be an opportunity for the Lebanese government to strengthen its sovereignty over its borders. And the Palestine here is I think the most tragic case, because it's just lost the world attention and lost the biggest support in the region. And now international aid is frozen, and Israel totally shut down entries and exits in and out from Gaza. I can just leave Turkey for the Q&A and for more elaboration. So this is the conclusion. So in general, war is already regional. The decapitation, as it was hoped, doesn't ensure the regime change. The regional economic risks are global and asymmetric, and in every scenario, either Iran falls, survives, or a deal has been reached, we will be involved in prolonged instability in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to shift to reactions from U.S. allies.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Florian Jostuan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Politics and Philosophy, and I generally specialize in political psychology and international conflict. And what I want to provide is a view from abroad. How do U.S. allies think about this conflict? And I want to get started and talk just a little bit more about Israel, which is obviously a key U.S. ally historically in the region. So the question that I want to raise a little bit more explicitly here is, why is it that Israel is not just supporting this conflict, but why has it co-initiated the attacks, as we might say? And I think the important, it's interesting to look at the official rhetoric that's coming out of Israel here. If you look at the official language from Prime Minister Netanyahu, you'll hear that Israel says it was a preemptive strike in order to remove threats against Israel, that we might call this an instance of perhaps strategic overstatement. What is true is that there have been ongoing negotiations between the United States and Iran, and these negotiations have taken place about the future of Iran's nuclear program. And it sounds like these negotiations haven't really been going anywhere. At least they have not been going in the direction that the United States and Israel would have liked to. Now, if we look at the kind of bigger picture in Israel, what's important to note is that, similar to what is true in the United States, in Israel too, there has been a sort of window of opportunity that the Israeli government is trying to exploit right now. On the one hand, it's important to note that in Israel, we are talking about an election year. There are general legislative elections taking place later this year. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been described as embattled domestically, and this is certainly seen by some observers in Israel as a political gamble to change the electoral outcomes later this year. At the same time, it's important to note that Israel is well aware of the fact that the current president in the White House is perhaps more open and interested in military action against against Iran, of course, than many, many previous US presidents in the past. So Israel, as a result, has lobbied aggressively towards military action because they're perceiving the current US leadership to be more receptive to these types of requests. Now, if we focus on other allies, and this is allies in the Americas, of course, but also fellow NATO allies in Europe, we see that for many of them, this is a conflict that they didn't want. This is true for the most part. If we look at Europe, there are some European countries that have expressed support. Albania, for instance, has provided clear vocal support for the United States' action. We also see that the fairly unimportant, in the grand scheme of things, president of the European Commission was verbally supportive of this mission. Most other European leaders are either outwardly skeptical, and a really good example might be the Prime Minister of Spain, who has not just criticized the attack, but also actually refused the United States to use military bases in Spain. And a lot of other countries are trying to thread a needle. They are pointing out that that the Iranian regime was very unpleasant, was an atrocious regime. They are pointing out that nobody is sad that the Iranian regime might be falling here, but they're also pointing out that this conflict, as started by the United States, is a violation of international law. And a really good example of this type of sentiment is France, for instance, which immediately after the US attack pointed out that it is Iran that is responsible for the fighting. However, the war that is taking place is outside of international law. Right? And so this is a really good example where you see that European leaders are threading a needle. On the one hand, they're trying to point out that this is a war that they don't agree of for international law reasons, but at the same time, they want to show support for the United States for strategic reasons. Now, what are the larger considerations here for U.S. allies? What's going on here, I think, is especially with regards to a lot of key allies in Europe, is that privately they are pretty unhappy about the conflict. They are unhappy about the fact that they haven't been looped in, and they do have concerns about the legality of this war. At the same time, the much bigger fish to fry for a lot of European countries is the Ukraine war. And European leaders are very, very careful to not upset the Trump administration because they need the United States' assistance in order to find a negotiated compromise in the Ukraine context. So upsetting the Trump administration here is potentially really costly for the Europeans. The second key European consideration is the Europeans don't want the war because they are significantly worried that a destabilized Iran might lead to significant refugee flows into Europe, which the Europeans have political reasons to avoid. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind as we are discussing how do U.S. allies think about this conflict broadly speaking, the macro trend here is that in Europe, in Canada, in the Americas, there are concerns about larger U.S. intentions and geostrategic orientations. U.S. allies have been concerned that they haven't been looped in, they haven't been notified prior to the conflict. There are concerns that there is no clearly defined strategy beyond just decapitating the Iranian regime. And European leaders, generally speaking, are concerned about sort of where this mission fits in the larger context of U.S. foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last section is about what next for and in Iran.
Good evening. My name is Charles Danoff. I am an assistant professor of political science. First of all, I would like to thank my esteemed colleagues for their presentations. And I'm going to try and cap things off as much as I can. My area of expertise, such as it is the nexus between politics and economics, with an understanding that it is nearly impossible to understand one without understanding the other. A perfect example of this is the last time I was doing one of these was to explain the sanctions package that the U.S. and the international community put in place in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A big part of that sanctions package, admittedly one that was added later, was the embargo on the legal sale of oil from Russia to other countries. The reason I mention this is because one of the developments we saw today was a relaxation of that sanctions package by the United States so that Russia could sell oil to India, with the hopeful impact being a decrease on oil prices, which have risen by a third in the last week and a half or so. This comes despite the fact that not only is Iran one of Russia's client states historically, but also because Russia has been providing intelligence to Iran about the locations of U.S. troops and just general positions. So hopefully you can see how this all fits together. All right, so where we find ourselves is that the U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign has killed thousands of Iranians, decimated a good chunk of their infrastructure. The Iranian response has been to fire missiles at Israel as well as U.S. bases in what we call the Greater Middle East, as well as its potential adversaries, both religious and geopolitical, in the region. This is also part of a tendency that Iran and Israel have taken advantage of this situation to settle previous scores and, press advantages where they see them. So, what else has happened? Well, as my colleague mentioned, Iran has responded to the decapitation attack of the Ayatollah Khomeini by putting his son, the Ayatollah Khomeini, in charge. The irony about this is that one of the alternatives that I will discuss will be the U.S. installing Reza Pahlavi as Shah, which those of my students in U.S. foreign policy will remember happened in 1953 as well. Also, the global economy has become even more volatile than before as we see the weakening of institutions and the dissolution of formerly solid alliances, and the end result being that predicting the future is going to be even more difficult than usual. That said, I will predict the future now, or at least I'll try. Now, when I say I'll predict the future, I'm talking about, say, from tomorrow to possibly summertime. I've done an extremely primitive first cut scenario analysis, so you can hopefully see the probabilities attached. We'll start with the more likely scenarios, the more likely outcomes, which the first of which is domestically, Khomeini stays the supreme leader, that there continues to be a religious and political crackdown in Iran, and thousands more Iranians die. Probability like 75%. Also, with regards to the U.S., the U.S. is probably going to suspend the bombing campaign relatively soon, declare victory, and move on to the next shiny object as Israel, Iran, and the Emirates continue to lob missiles at each other and generally deal with the fallout of the campaign. Again, 75% probably. Less likely, again, the U.S. installs a Reza Pahlavi as Shah, like in 1953, which was, as some of you know, the date of Iran's first, last, and only democratic election, which resulted in Mohammad Mossadegh becoming prime minister, at which point the U.S. helped to engineer a coup, putting Reza Pahlavi back on the peacock throne as Shah. So try that again, triggers a crackdown on Iranian citizens, causing thousands of more deaths in Iran and eventual reinstatement of hardline Shia regime, 1% to 2% probability. Less likely, the United States invades Iran, puts thousands of troops in country, creating an Afghanistan-like quagmire, resulting in thousands of Iranian deaths, even more destabilization in the region, possible reinstatement of the draft, 0.5% probability. And finally, Iran has been building a secret nuclear weapons program this whole time, fires nukes at Israel and the United States, which the United States retaliates in kind, billions die, and the earth becomes uninhabitable. This probably won't happen. Thank you.
All right. On that note, we're going to open the floor to Q&A. You'll note that tonight we don't have an audience mic. What I propose is that we take 3 questions at a time. I'll take the notes, I'll distribute them to our panel. I'll repeat them for our UI Live audience, and we'll get through as many as we can in the 20 minutes that remain. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll call on you and I'll jot it down. Please. Shout it out. Give us.
I recently heard that President Pezeshkian issued an apology for Iran's strikes on its Gulf neighbors. I think that it shows a potential leadership rift, and I'm curious if you see this as a genuine de-escalation attempt, or it's just tactual posturing.
Thank you. Another, please.
With the whole situation causing like oil prices to spike, and then a lot of the environmental consequences of the bombings in Iran might make oil like scarcer, like more expensive than usual. Do you think we could see more policy pushes for renewables and green energy and nuclear maybe in the U.S.?
Thank you. One more, please.
So we see a directly quick decapitation of the leader of the nation, and I'm just trying to figure out why we have such a long continuation. So, like, what conditional variables are at play that cause this case to be different than, say, the Venezuelan case where Maduro was quickly taken out of office?
Thank you. Okay. First question is about the apology for the strikes and whether that shows a leadership rift or an actual rift. And I mean, if you'll take that one. Oil prices and environmental consequences leading to renewables in the United States. Charles, that sounds like a political economy kind of thing to me. And about the decapitation strike and conditional variables different from Venezuela. Chen, if you'll be so kind. So we'll take that in order.
I'm not really sure if I got the question wrong. So there were announcements about genuine apologies about attacking Israel. So yeah, that should be genuine.
Not Israel, but sites in Gulf states.
From whom?
The president.
The president.
I see. It's from president. I don't mean to the Gulf states are kind of they chosen their sites. They chosen their they're giving some they're getting into some kind of military cooperation with U.S. is that they accepted the consequences. So and the genuine apology, maybe, yeah, it might be because Trump is still needing those people, those countries and those states. So that might be like showing a good faith in the long road. It's kind of we are just at the beginning, and the things are still evolving. And I think the best case scenario in the short term, this conflict will be resumed until summer. So they need to keep those Gulf states in good condition to keep up the war. So I think it's kind of the strategically, it's in the long run, it will just create a better fighting capacity for the U.S. So I can say it's genuine, yeah.
And I'd say, in further answer to your question, that the comment from the Iranian president is based on the same premise. But I don't think it'll limit the exchange of fire between them and the U.S. targets. Charles, are we about to have a renaissance of renewables and other things as the oil prices climb?
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not going to happen. First of all, oil prices are high, but they're not historically high. They'd need to go a lot higher for the political will in the U.S. to develop, to push that sort of agenda forward, especially given the hostility to such an agenda that exists in the current administration, right? The head of the government flies from Washington, D.C. to Palm Beach every weekend and back again. So energy conservation and commitment to arresting climate change is not a concern. Thank you.
Chen?
All right. Bill, can you just
So conditional
briefly-
variables on why this decapitation strike has played out differently than the one, for example, in Venezuela, where it successfully began and ended the conflict basically in one fell swoop.
So the difference?
Yeah.
Dowsing. So, well, I think clearly the operational factors are very different in the two cases, right? In Iran, is much more complex. The stakes is much higher, and there's no realistic chance that you can send the U.S. Special Forces in and take their supreme leader and take him out, right? So, but I think, what these two operations share is it reveals the current administration's belief in leader-specific punishment. Okay, so they believe in different forms of decapitation and think that will deliver the outcome they were hoping for. Again, as I said during my part, I think, Nelson, the things you were asking, we will probably don't know in the near future because we're still too early. We have to wait for those people to publish their memoir, and then we can get more insight of those discussions. Yeah.
We'll say we'll be able to expand further in informal session after 6 o'clock if you have remaining questions. In the meantime, I want to get to send more questions, please.
What are the chances that the Israeli or the United States military will attack the new Ayatollah, attempting, to take him out, whether or not they're able to protect it?
Thank you. Here and then here.
In this conflict, we've seen the Strait of Hormuz shut down, basically, and many countries in the Gulf have halted production or shut down their oil refineries. And then with Venezuela, we've seen the U.S. take over their oil production and everything that comes with that. And I've heard with this new Shield of America's position that was given to Christino, the now former DHS secretary, that the details are still unclear, but it's being formed as a sort of strategic alliance between countries in the Americas for security, economic alliance, all that stuff. My question is, with this development in the Americas and this current war in the Middle East, do you maybe see the administration trying to create something, a group that is rivaling a group like OPEC? And
Thank you. And here.
I'd like to ask about the Iranian population alignments and how they will evolve throughout this conflict, or how they have been through this conflict as well. There have been mass protests in Iran for a few years now against the regime in charge, but we saw that there was a more unified front from the population when these strikes hit. As you know, a nation at war is usually more unified. But will this create further resentment towards the U.S. from the Iranian population, or could we see this bloodshed leading to more resentment against both the regime and the United States?
Thank you. I know we have here and here. Here we'll do one more set after this. So we're going to try and get through both in the last 10 minutes. Aaron, would you take the last one on internal issues? Professor Daman studies, among other things, human rights and protest movements. Chances that Israel or the U.S. or anyone attacks the new Ayatollah? Who's got that one?
100%. Yes,
Oh,
100%.
so we're going with yes on that, and then the group to rival OPEC or some other things, Charles? Okay, we'll do Aaron first.
Okay. So the question was if the protest movements in Iran can take this as a starting point towards some real solid movement against the Iranian regime. I think the answer is a hard no. I think that this has destabilized whatever domestic kinds of opposition movements were on the ground, so that now people are far more concerned about their own security. And after that, it just kind of goes up, right? Maybe your family, maybe your region, such that it'll be much harder for any sort of domestic opposition movements in Iran to think meaningfully about a formal response that would be able to capture this moment. It has also kickstarted the Iranian regime into a far more repressive moment where they are way more concerned about keeping things shut down, even than they were when they were killing 30,000 people. So the level of repression that they are facing is harder, and the level of fragmentation among the opposition is harder. Add on to that the added element that this is now a rhetoric that the regime can use to foster support for itself in a rally around the flag way. So I think in all ways this is likely to be more detrimental towards moving the needle away from domestic support or any kind of real domestic challenge to the current Iranian regime.
Thank you. And the question about a rival group for OPEC or some other alternate way to geostrategically react to the oil crisis that may be pending.
Right. I'd also like to address the probability question about killing Khamenei. First of all, with regard to that, yeah, they'll try, but you have to remember that the U.S. was able to kill Khamenei because he went to his office and they killed him there. Perhaps his son will be a little wilier about evasion. Also, you add to that that this is the least information and intelligence secure administration possibly in U.S. history, and the chance that the Iranians don't know another attack is coming is pretty low. As far as forming an alternative, part of the problem with that is that the attempt to force American oil companies to refine and sell Venezuelan oil did not go very well because the profit margin is way too thin. It's, I'm not sure how to put it, lumpy. Venezuelan oil needs more refining. And the idea of forming, first of all, Shield of America's another prediction. I think in 6 months we're going to forget that ever existed. As far as forming another alliance, forming alliances is not really what this administration does. So I'm skeptical about something like that forming. Excellent
All right.
question, though.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for this last set. So there's one here, then we go back there to those two. Here you go.
Like the push for the installment of Reza Pahlavi has not been met with much popular support in Iran. Do you imagine that Israel would continue to push him as a replacement, or will they have to change their tactics going forward for what the future of Iran looks like?
Thank you.
Given the recent conflicts and altercations in the Strait of Hormuz and how it relates to oil, which has been thus far this administration's priority, do you see a potential path to escalation in perhaps not boots on the ground, but certainly naval forces being utilized to protect oil in the Strait of Hormuz, given what we've already seen with Navy ships being, I don't know if they have been used or if Trump has said he will use them to protect oil carriers, but do you see that as a potential path to escalation?
Thank you. And in the sweatshirt, Vandal sweatshirt.
Is democratization likely to occur from this conflict, and more importantly, what are the reasons why it won't?
Thank you. Florian, we're going to give you the last one, a democratization question. Either recent conflicts in the Strait of Hormuz and the path to escalation, Chen, if you would, or Aaron, if you want, one of the two. And then how are we likely to see an escalation via the Straits of Hormuz? Florian, if you would.
On the Straits of Hormuz?
Nope, you get the democratization question.
Okay. I'm skeptical, I'm highly skeptical that democratization might be an outcome here. So political science scholarship tells us that there is a substantial number of preconditions that need to be met for countries to build stable democracies, many of which aren't really established in Iran as is, right? It starts with like certain like basic economic development. It starts with like cultural homogeneity or broad buy-in by like all sorts of different societal factors on a very new system of government. And keep in mind, right, that Iran hasn't operated as a democracy for like 7 decades, right? So there also isn't like a broad, substantial history to go back on. So very skeptical of that prospect.
You could just continue about Reza Pahlavi perhaps as being introduced into the equation.
Yeah, right. So Reza Pahlavi is definitely presenting himself.
I'm sorry, not everybody will know who Reza Pahlavi is, so if you can remind us who he is.
Yeah,
briefly.
so Reza Pahlavi is a descendant of the last Shah of Iran, right? And he has presented himself as a viable option for Iran's political future. So the implied system of government here might be kind of a perhaps non-democratic form of a version of modern-day monarchy, essentially. There is significant, there is opposition, right? So the Iranian opposition is very much, I don't want to use the word fractured, but there are different forces that have different visions for what the future of Iran should be. And these forces are not all in agreement, and it is not at all clear at this point which of these different forces should be in charge of the country if the current regime were no longer in place.
And if we can then broaden that last question to potential for escalation, whether it's about the Straits of Hormuz or other, anyone want to address that? Go ahead, Amina.
The escalation is already here. Like I'm not really seeing a new battleground because there's a 8-minute video of Trump, and he listed the aims of U.S. in that video, and one of the aim that is stated the annihilate their navy, the Iran's navy here. So there's this black navy that belongs to Iran, and it's kind of there's almost 60 battleships they have, and if you recall, there's this recent event. One of them has been just sink offshore at of Sri Lanka. So the escalation is already here. So the escalation, if you mean that there will be not the air but also the warfare on the water. So it's already here. So it's already on our doorstep. If they push on the opening the Hormuz Strait, we might need a boots on the ground strategy. So that might be a whole other level of escalation. But on the Navy part, we already there. So it's already on the agenda here.
Thank you. We're right at time. And I know there's other people who have questions. We're available to chat after this. I would like to thank both those of you here in the room and the folks who joined us on UI Live. I appreciate our tech support for helping us with the video and the sound, and thank you for coming.